There are several components that fall under the heading of having a fluent understanding of investment real estate that are non-negotiable components. One, we need to understand our own mind and mindset. Oftentimes our own mind is the limitation of our success. We need to have a handle on this idea of possibility. Two, we need to understand financing in, out, left, and right. Not just simple financing, complex financing. To be a successful real estate investor, you need to know how to buy a house for $400,000, sell it for $400,000, and make $150,000. Now, if what I just said to you is really not making sense, this idea of financing being so critical, you need to go back to Wisdom for Wealth and Foundations for Freedom, and you need to study. Because this is a non-negotiable component, the financing and the understanding of it. The next thing is that all of that knowledge and mindset, if we don't have the ability to apply it in a one-on-one setting with a seller, nothing is going to happen in our business. And therefore, the art form that is negotiation, we need to have a handle on it. Non-negotiable in the heading of a successful real estate investment career is understanding the art form that's negotiation. Once we have some success buying buildings, the day one we own that building, we are now in the management business. Like it or not, we now have to have a fluency around property management, or this ship that we just bought is going to go to the bottom of the ocean quickly without proper management. The next heading we want to address is the very topic of this series. This series has to do with the whole world of understanding how buildings are put together and how we can build them properly, how we can remodel them properly to draw out of this opportunity the greatest profit given our objectives in that situation. Now let's talk about objectives. Let's start with the end here. Our objective has to be, first and foremost, in the investment building world, to make the most profit out of this project that we create. The second objective has to be to do it in the most efficient use of our time. And the third thing has to do with building something and remodeling something so as to cut down on the maintenance management hours that lie ahead of us based on what we're building. Okay, so this is a rough introduction to the idea that real estate is construction and construction is real estate. Every building I have ever bought or built sits on a piece of dirt. That dirt is real property. And we are simply attaching a structure to the dirt, be it inheriting one that's already there or building it from scratch, and now it becomes a part of the real property. The whole idea of understanding construction is critical. And people just glaze over when we start talking construction. I think, though, that in the world of investment real estate, having a thorough knowledge of construction is critical. What I'd like to do is to take a typical building, and I would like you to walk with me through the process of construction, from the pre-planning that goes along with that project to the actual site demolition and excavation, to the foundation and framing and so forth, all the way through the building, to talk about each component of construction so that you can understand how a building is put together. Remodeling becomes much more reasonable when we can look at a building and understand the way it was put together. Changing it is step 2. Understanding how it is put together is step 1. And so I'd like to break this out into several different components, but first starting with a new construction understanding. That if we were to build a brand new building today, what does the process look like? What are the things we need to consider? What does the schedule roughly look like? What comes first? What's second, etc.? And what are the decisions that we're going to have to make and choices that we're going to have to make along the way to come up with our best finished product? Once we understand new construction and generally how things are put together, then we can attack the world of remodeling buildings, because we're going to walk into that building knowing how roughly it was put together day one, and therefore be able to make a reasonable assessment of the time, energy, effort, and money that it's going to cost us to change what's there to what we want it to be. Hopefully that makes sense to you. To me, the cart is remodeling, but understanding the horse is the construction process in general. We've got to get the horse in front of the cart here. I've taken students into remodels before and said, oh, let's look at this, and this is why we need to do this, and this is why we need to do that. And I look at their eyes, and they're just glossed over. Because when I look at a wall, or when I look at a roof line, I know how it's built. And therefore, I know what it's going to take to modify it and change it. We need to understand how things are built, essentially from the ground up, to then be able to take them apart and change them. So let's start with new construction. And the scenario I'd like to put in front of us is that we have a desire to build a 6-unit apartment that in time we will convert to condominiums and sell at some point in our future. The reason I have laid out the scenario of building a 6-plex to keep for a period of time and then have the possibility of converting to condominiums is this. If I can produce this 6-plex, whereby my cost of dirt, my soft costs. When I say soft costs, do you know what I mean? It's not like marshmallows. It's specifically related to costs that are non-tangible. 2x4s, plumbing, wiring, roofing, that's all very tangible. Those are hard costs. I can grab them and pick them up. Soft costs are engineering, architecture, landscape plans, lighting plans, permits, those sorts of things that are not a part of the nuts and bolts and hardware that we need to use in building a home or a building. The point of bringing up this soft cost is that it's a big part of the overall equation, but when I add up the cost of a building, I'm looking at the dirt, I'm looking at the soft costs. I'm looking at my finance costs, my setup fees around finance, my interim interest on that construction loan throughout the project. And then I'm adding to that my hard costs of actually all the nuts and bolts and subcontractors and materials, labor and materials to build that building. And I'm going to finish out with a number of what I've got into this project. Now, in the ideal scenario, when I add that all up, I'm going to be able to finance that number for an amount that when I add that number to taxes and insurance and maintenance and utilities and management, etc., that my rental income will cover that number. Now, let's just say this 6-plex, including land, cost me $1 million. Okay? Let's just say $900,000 for the soft costs and hard costs and $100,000 for the piece of dirt. There's my $1 million. Now, in real world, it may be more than that, but let's just use that for the purposes of this exercise. $1 million, if I get a 6% interest-only loan, is going to cost me $5,000 a month. Okay? That $5,000 a month, plus my taxes, my insurance, my maintenance, my utilities, my management, now that number might be up to $7,500, $8,000 a month. I now have, let's just round it up and say that it's as much as $9,000 a month for this project. Well, I've got 6 units. I know that I'm going to have to rent those 6 units for $1,500 a month to break even. 6 units, $1,500 a month, $9,000. I've got just enough rental income coming in to pay for my mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, utility, vacancy, management, all of my fees. Well, if I can do that, is it worth all that effort to build a building, go to all that where it just breaks even? Hell yes, it's worth it. Because now I've got two things going for me. I've got 6 tenants that are buying that building for me. And obviously in that scenario, I have created an amortized loan. So every monthly payment I make, I am making a little principal headway. My interest on that $1 million is $5,000. If I pay 6, well, I'm reducing the principal by $1,000 a month. That's nice. So my tenants are buying me that building. The other thing I'm doing is I've got an asset now in the stream of appreciation. So as land values go up, as building values go up, I'm getting the benefit of the appreciation of that building over time. So I've got arrows going in both directions. A decreasing principal balance paid for by the tenants and an increase of building value over time with appreciation. Okay? Over time, another thing's going to happen. I'm going to be able to charge a little bit more rent, of course, and that newfound rent becomes new leverageable equity. So now I've got, if I'm able to raise those rents to $1,600 a month, let's say a year from now, and my other costs all stay reasonably the same, I've created some additional leverageable equity. All right? That's why we want to do that. That's day one. What I want you to see is that if I spend, $150,000 or $175,000 per unit, including the dirt, to build this unit, that's what it's worth as an apartment. But what is that unit worth as a condominium? I have apartments that, as an apartment, from a pure income approach to value, are worth $200,000. But as a condominium, if they were sold, would be worth $400,000. So the upside of having an asset that covers itself today, but here comes that expandability picture, that down the road, as you've depreciated this out, you can move it down the road as far as you want, but know that if this is ever sold, it's going to be sold one unit at a time. And we've spent a lot of time in our education talking about condominium conversions. You can convert anything to a condominium with some legal paperwork, some surveys, some Mylars, some bylaws, some public offering statement. And if it's 10 years down the line or 15, you're going to come into this building and do some upgrades, hopefully not entire system upgrades, just cosmetic upgrades to get it ready to sell, and on the way you go. That's the best of all worlds. Now, let's pencil it and see how it comes out if all of a sudden, with that rental income that we have, that $1,500 a month out of this unit, what if this building, instead of costing $1 million to build, what if including the dirt cost $2 million to build? Well, all of a sudden, this doesn't work as a keep property, does it? There's no way. I mean, interest only on $2 million is $10,000 a month. We're sideways before we even get to the taxes and insurance, maintenance, and utilities. But if each of these units were worth $400,000 each, well, now at least we're looking at it. If they were worth $500,000 each, now we've got a project that might make sense as a build and sell. Certainly not anything if it costs $2 million that we would build and rent. Makes no sense at all. This is how we're going to make a decision of what to do based on the cash flow in the income stream of the rental units, asking the real straightforward question, does this income stream pay for our mortgage, taxes, and insurance, maintenance, and utilities? If not, we've got to look at the next step. Should we do this project anyway, build it, and just sell it? Now, remember, that little transition there of thinking has a lot to do with the decisions we're going to make in the construction process. If I don't have to keep a unit and manage it over time, I am able to make some cost-saving decisions along the way that very, very few people would even recognize the difference. For example, we talked about crawl space. I could put a 2-foot crawl space in this thing if I was going to sell it. If I was going to keep it over 10 years, I'd spend the extra money to put a 4 or 5 foot crawl space in and rat slab it and put some can lights. You see? So I'm going to get away with a cheaper foundation because this thing is going to be sold, etc., etc. We've talked about a lot of those decisions over time. I don't need to put the 35-year comp certainty shingle 90-pound roof on. I can put the 15-year cheap comp roof on because you know what? I'm not going to own this thing for more than a few months after construction. Okay, so with that overall introduction, I'd like to start with an organized approach to this. Construction is all about having a clear, organized plan of attack. And construction starts with the dirt, the actual piece of dirt. Now, the real estate brain in us, the investment brain, says that all dirt is not alike. We've got to make sure that whatever we're about to build is being built on a piece of dirt that has demand for what we want. The location of that dirt is critical. Now, that's kind of the investment side of the equation. From the construction side of the equation, the dirt has an entirely different analysis. It can be in the best location known to man, but is it the piece of dirt that makes construction reasonable? Let's take a look at that. The most ideal site that we can be involved in as builders, and we're builders, right? The most ideal site is something that is very level, that has no environmental issues associated with it, meaning that the soil is stable, there's no wetlands, there's no steep slopes, it's not bordering things like streams or environmentally sensitive areas where setbacks become an issue. A nice flat piece of dirt that has at its available use all of the utilities right there on the street. Now, that being said, we have to distinguish some thoughts here between land developers and builders. Land developers are buying large, undeveloped pieces of land, bringing in all of the roads, the sidewalks, the utilities, the street lights, the drainage retention systems, etc., to the entire development to create finished lots. And certainly, that's a whole nother series. We're not going to be talking about land development. What I'm talking about primarily as a builder of investment-grade real estate is I'm going to known locations. I'm going to a great location, and most of the time, this piece of dirt that I'm going to find is going to have a crummy little house on it, and my intention will be to blade that house and build a much nicer new house to resell, or I may blade that house and build a mixed-use project or a multiplex project, something that is an infill type project to where I can look at the street, I can look at the existing utility package and do some analysis on that. Let's talk about that almost in a feasibility sense. If I'm looking at a piece of dirt that has a crummy house on it, and I'm going to blade this thing, and I'm going to build, let's just say I'm going to build a sixplex on this. I can go to the city or county, and I can pull up all of the as-built drawings, the drawings that represent current reality, all of the utility systems for that particular location. And I'm going to want to do this. In a feasibility study, I'm going to want to see, is there a storm sewer out there on the main street that will service this property? And if there is a storm sewer, what depth is that storm sewer at? Is there a sanitary sewer? Is there gas, a gas main on the street? Is there electric serving the area? And if it's not underground, what are the codes that will apply to me in terms of running that power, the new power to my new building? Do I have all of the phone and cable utilities available on the site so that I can simply tap into it? Do I have a fire hydrant within 500 feet of my site? Every city has different codes, but you want to check this out. Because sometimes if there isn't a fire hydrant within 500 feet of your site, you're going to be putting one in. These are the kinds of feasibility items you look at. It's very likely I'm going to go out there and do a soils test. I'm going to get a geologist to drill a few holes in the site to see what kind of soil do I have. Do I have something that is just rock hard where I'm not going to have to dig deep to find good, solid bearing soil? Or is it 6 feet down? Because if it's 6 feet down to find good, solid soil to set footings on, I'm going to have a lot more expenses in my foundation. All of these kinds of things I'm going to check out. Then I'm going to talk to the city about all of the codes that apply to what I'm wanting to build on that site. Now, this gets exhaustive, but it's the one thing you don't think about that's going to really catch you here. So let me give you at least the idea of the questions I'm going to ask the city. One, we're going to start with setbacks. Setbacks are minimum building setbacks from property lines. And of course, the front of the building is going to have different setbacks from the street than the sides and the back. Now, that being said, what if this is a corner lot, meaning that there's streets on two sides of this? Do you see how that comes into the equation? So I'm going to take this exact site and I'm going to walk into the city, lay the plot plan down on the counter and say, given this particular piece of dirt, what are my setbacks? I want to build a sixplex here. It appears that the zoning in this area allows for that. Here's my proposal. What are my setbacks? And they're going to look it up. This isn't, poetry. They're going to be able to flip a book open and say, here it is. 5-foot side setbacks, 25-foot front setback, 15-foot rear setback. There's your setbacks. The second thing I'm going to ask is the height of the building. Now, this isn't an answer that's going to come to you in just a number because it's going to have a few but-ifs attached to it. For example, you may get an answer that says 30 foot maximum height. However, if your roof is greater than a 412 pitch, you can go up to 35 feet with a 412 pitch on the roof. Maximum 30 feet with a flat roof. They're going to give you a little bit of slack if you have a pitched roof. We're going to get to what I mean by 412 pitch when we start talking about roofing. But understanding exactly the maximum height. Now remember I said we start with an ideal, nice, flat lot? How do you calculate height of a building if you have a sloped lot? Height from where? What point do you measure height from? Well, this is a whole calculation all by itself. And in most cities and counties, you take the elevation reading at the four corners of the proposed building that you're going to put on that, the four most extreme corners. You take the dirt elevation, you add all four of those up, and you divide by 4, which gives you an average height above ground, and that becomes your maximum height of the building. So think about if you're on a really steep slope and the downhill side of your building might be 50 feet tall, but the uphill side of your building is only 15 feet tall. But when you average it all out, you could still meet height codes for that particular building because of the topography of your lot. So it's not just an easy number calculation. It has to do with the corners of your building and the topography of your lot. All right, so take that into consideration. There's actually opportunity that comes when you have a lot that on 3 sides of it is very flat, 3 kind of an L shape that's all flat, but you have one corner that really dips down low. You can see what that one corner is going to do is it's going to actually increase your overall height of the building because of how low that one corner is. And that's the upside. The downside is you're going to have some more foundation costs in that corner, building that corner up. So there's a lot to be said about height, but you're going to have to sit down with one of the city engineers and really have a real good understanding of what the maximum height in that particular lot is. The next thing I look at, and these are givens, the permeability, maximum impervious surface area allowed for that particular piece of dirt. Now, what the hell does that mean? Impervious surface area. Well, think about it. This is surface area of that lot that rainwater cannot soak into. So obviously the roof is impervious. The paved or concrete driveways, the walkways, anything that rainwater can't soak into. And each city or county has, in that particular lot and zoning, a maximum area that is impervious to rainwater. Or said differently, there needs to be a minimum amount of that lot, percentage-wise, that is permeable to rainwater. So you have to know that. If you all of a sudden start designing a building and it covers too much of the lot, your building and all your walkways and your impermeable surface area, the answer is going to be no. You can't do that. There needs to be a certain amount of that lot that is left for rainwater to soak into. Now, that being said, we're going to the how do we get rid of water that comes on that site. I mentioned in your feasibility that we're really looking at the storm sewer. Is there a storm sewer on that particular frontage that we can tie into? And what is the elevation of that storm sewer? Do you see why I ask the depth of that storm sewer? If the main storm sewer line runs in front of the street and is 2 feet under the street level, right? And we're having to dig our foundation down 4 feet to get good bearing soil, how do we get that water that we're collecting in our footing drains? Now we're having to get it up to tie into a storm sewer system. Really difficult. There's a couple basic principles that we need to understand right out of the chute. One of them is gravity. If we don't have a gravity flow line, I don't care if it's your storm sewer line or your sanitary sewer line, sure, we can get water from point A to point B, but when we start involving holding tanks and pumps to get storm water out of there, we start incurring a lot of cost. We really would like to have gravity sewer systems and gravity storm sewer systems. Let's understand what we're looking at in the storm sewer world. Most of the time in infill areas, city density areas, there is a storm sewer system available. We're going to have to tie into that. Now, on its surface, that sounds fairly simple, right? We simply collect all of our impermeable surface water from our roof, our driveways, our walkways. We collect it in catch basins, gutters, and we simply plumb it into the storm line. Well, that sounds simple, but it doesn't work that way. If we have a huge amount of rainfall and all of this newly created impermeable surface area starts collecting water and rushes it directly into the storm sewer system, the problem is that it overloads the storm sewer system. And so most cities and counties in density areas are going to require what's called a retention system for your storm water. Now, retention systems, if you think about this, it temporarily retains on site all of your rainwater and then allows it into the storm sewer system at a controlled volume. Now, just picture it in your mind, a very simplistic picture, and you have to appreciate how difficult it is. What I'd love to do right now is to show you a simple drawing. And in some of our material, of course, we're gonna have some pictures that will help me help you, because painting a picture with words sometimes is very difficult. But the simple picture that I'd like to show you is, let's picture all of your gutters of your building coming down downspouts that then feed into pipes, and all those pipes feed into a great big vault, a big container. Think of like a big septic tank, right? That can fill up with water, hold a large volume of water. And it holds it in this tank like an underground swimming pool with a lid on it. But the outflow line out of that tank is only 1 inch round. And so you have this huge tank filling up with like a 3 or 6 inch line of water coming into it. But the only way to get it going out of the tank is through a 1 inch line. And so that 1 inch line controls the overall volume that feeds into the city or county storm sewer system. That's the general idea of a retention system. We're going to want in our feasibility to talk to the city or county about their retention system requirements. Every city and county is slightly different. Of course, you can extrapolate that it has to do with the mathematics of how much impermeable surface area are you creating? What is the average rainfall? What is the projected volume of water that you're going to be wanting to put into the storm sewer system? And the larger the impermeable surface area, the larger your retention system is going to have to be. Rural single-family home construction, many rural areas you're going to have to put in septic tanks and drain fields. High-density zones, I need to tie into a sewer, all right? Management of a septic tank with a multiplex is just crazy. So I'm checking that out, all right? So those are the basics, and we'll talk when we start going into the dirt work of this site about creating those retention systems. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But understand, I'm going to really spend some time checking this out, because if that retention system gets to be too expensive, this project may not be feasible. So it's all about understanding how this goes together to then be able to cost it out and see what this project looks like. All right? Okay, so we're still in the feasibility stage. Just about every city in the high-density areas, they have architectural design committees. This is a committee that says, here's the way we want this building to look when it's done. This is the style of building we want you to build. This has nothing to do with codes, setbacks, construction type, heights. It has everything to do with the way the thing looks. You're going to want to talk to those people to understand their expectations, because in the initial research of this project, if their expectations are for all of the landscape beds to be lit, all of the landscape beds to be sprinkled, all of the siding on the building to be of natural wood product, all of the roofing material to be of natural wood product, all of these things that they very much can control, you need to know about, because this is going to come into not only your overall design of the project, but your ability to initially cost out what you're looking for. If ever you tie into a piece of dirt where you want to blade a little house and build a new building, check out to make sure that that little house you're blading wasn't on the historical list. There are certain zones that are marked historical. And all of a sudden, your ability to do what you want to do with that building? Right. No, you're going to be told what to do. And that this can be refurbished to its original glow and splendor, but no modifications. Check that one out. So from a very site perspective, we're looking at a lot of things. If I'm building a multiplex, I promise you that particular building is going to be on a sewer system versus a septic system. Vegetation, another big thing to consider. Again, there are codes about what has to stay and what you can remove. Some cities and counties have mitigation requirements, meaning that if you take out a tree that's sitting right where you want to build, you have to put in 5 trees on that site. So check out the vegetation guidelines to make sure that you can remove what you need to remove, and also to cost out any mitigation of what you may have to be putting back as a result of what you're going to remove. Environmentally sensitive areas. I have to tell you that that piece of dirt has to be so valuable in terms of what you can do to even consider all of what you're going to have to do if this particular dirt has any portion of it that's environmentally sensitive. For example, if you are building on a site whereby even a portion of that site is considered wetlands, I'm almost going to tell you across the board that you don't have enough money You would almost have to be given that piece of dirt for all the money you will spend in wetlands preservation, mitigation, and research. The environmental requirements that come with sensitive areas are so thick and bureaucratic that from purely a time and engineering standpoint, most sites out there are not worth the time and energy that you will spend to get approval on a portion of the property when the other is considered hazardous or wetlands or environmentally sensitive. I am all about a straight line to get done what I'm trying to get done. And I have learned, I have learned that if I'm building right next to a stream, or if I'm building on an environmentally steep slope, or if there's an eagle's nest on a tree that's on the property, or if there's a wetland on the property, or if I'm within so many feet of certain environmental treasures, all of a sudden, your particular piece of dirt has so many limitations that it's usually not worth construction. I'll give you an example here in Seattle. I think it's just one of the most amazing realities of our day. A very close friend of mine has a piece of dirt, actually 2 pieces of dirt, back to back. And when he bought them, they each had 2 crummy little houses on them. Well, 10 years ago, he took one of the crummy houses, bulldozed it, and built a triplex on it. As simple as that. No big deal, right? The other crummy little house remained, and he knew at some point in time he was going to blade that crummy little house and build another triplex. Well, in the last 10 years, somebody discovered that the whooping cranes in their natural migratory pattern fly within a mile of this site overhead during a 7 or 8 month period of the year, and having construction going on underneath their migratory pattern stresses them out and therefore makes them vulnerable to reproductive problems as a result of the stress by flying over a job site. And therefore, you can only build in the dirt zones that are under this migratory pattern 4 months out of the year when they're not flying over. Now, when he first told me this, I thought he was giving me the line of all lines. I just couldn't believe this. But, I made a few phone calls and the joke was on me. Now, don't get me wrong. I love animals. I am all for saving the planet, the whole environmental, the recycle thing, But I got to tell you, if I bought that piece of dirt where a half mile away there's more construction going on than you can imagine, it would have been the last thing I would have thought of. That all of a sudden my window of construction for this particular site is 4 months because of the overflying whooping cranes and their inability to handle construction stress. In a million years, I wouldn't have thought of that. That is exactly the point I'm making, is that in your feasibility study of this piece of dirt, think broadly. Ask all of the questions. Visit all of the departments at the city. Because when you sign and close escrow, you're going to get everything that comes with that site, things that in your wildest dreams you couldn't have imagined. So there's one, for example. Okay, so we've bought our site. Here we are. We are the happy new owner of this site. It's got a crummy little house on it. Our intention is to blade this crummy house and build ourselves a tremendous sixplex. New construction from start to finish. And we're pretty excited about this. And so we go into the city, county, and we get our demolition permit to blade this little house. And one of the questions on the demolition permit, not only how many cubic yards are you blading and hauling, but are there any hazardous materials in this structure? And they give you a whole list of hazardous materials that need to be separated and hauled away independent of the rest of the structure. Wow. Well, let's talk about one of them right out of the chute. Let's talk about asbestos siding. Now, asbestos siding looks like a lot of other types of siding out there. It looks very much like wood shingle siding. You have to know it. And this is, again, in your feasibility, as you're looking at things, you're going to really study the siding on that home. But you know what? You looked at this and it looked just fine because it was vinyl siding. Well, guess what? Nobody ever put vinyl siding on an old house. It wasn't around when they built this house. It's covering something. And in your feasibility, you need to pull up some of this vinyl siding and look behind it to see what's there. You didn't do that. And now you discover that you have to not only peel off the vinyl siding and set it aside. Now, in order to remove this asbestos siding, you are going to have to involve those who do this for a living, the hazmat environmental specialists. And what they're going to do is they're going to come in and they're going to tarp off your entire site. Every piece of dirt on that site is going to have black plastic on it. Then they're going to come in with their white protective suits. You're going to be hiring the fire department to spray a mist of water over this entire site while you remove this, or I should say, have it removed one shingle at a time, being very careful not to crack, break, or create dust. Every one of these shingles is going to be put in a haz bag and hauled to a hazardous materials waste site. You will spend more money taking the shingles off this house and removing them than you will removing the entire rest of the house and hauling it away. The removal of this structure is something that has to be taken very serious. And in the same vein, we're going to be talking about underground tanks, right? Old oil tanks. We've got to do in our research, are there any? Have they been removed? If they've been filled and are sitting there, we still have to remove them to be able to build our new building. Where are they? Every one of these considerations needs to be looked at because this is no simple matter. And when you're digging out an old oil tank, if it hasn't already been decommissioned, you've got to be incredibly careful so that you don't smack the side of it with the backhoe and all that oil leak out onto your site. Because if that happens, now you've got a real problem on your hands. You've got raw old oil on your site, and believe me, all it's going to take is one phone call, and that site will be shut down, and you will be doing all of the proper steps to remove that tank and the oil that you've just spilled. So these underground tanks, anything underground that has to be removed, I need you to really pay attention and calculate what that's all about. You can get estimates up front from people that will guarantee safe removal. To think that your dirt guy, the guy that you're going to have dig your foundation, work on the site, clear the trees, is also going to be the guy that's going to pull out your oil tank successfully, be careful. Because half those guys on a backhoe, knock down everything in sight. This is a very careful identification of where it's at, very careful excavation, very careful removal so as to not create a bigger problem. One of the reasons that I have a geotech drill different parts of the lot is also to check and see if anything has been buried on the lot that you may not know about. The geotech can run around with a great big auger and drill some holes on the site, and he can tell if the soil is consistent and solid throughout. If somebody has buried a stump pile in the backyard where you may need to build a building on top of that, you're going to be excavating down and excavating out all kinds of rubbish to get down to bearing soil. And all that means is you're incurring more cost. So check out this piece of dirt carefully, okay? All right, so we're making our transition now. We've done our initial site inspection. From that, we need to create a set of plans that will go in front of the powers that be at the city to start on the process of getting approvals to build this building. Now, That sounds like a one-step show, but it isn't. I mentioned that in most density areas, there's an architectural design board review that you have to go through and get approval for before you're going to build this building. My suggestion is this. First, check and see if your area has an ADB, an architectural design review or architectural design board. If they do, my suggestion is this. With the architect or designer that you're going to work with, to draft some very beautiful color renditions of what they want to see in terms of building design, the elevations of the building, the landscape design, the walkway, the lighting. But I want you to draft that in a very non-technical way. In other words, what I see people doing all the time that makes no sense is they say, great, our site checks out, let's draw up a set of plans. And they draw up a construction set of plans. They have all the plans and engineering done. And then they take this set of plans in front of the Architectural Design Board Committee, and the Architectural Design Board Committee says, no, I don't like the look of this building. I want to change the modulation or this elevation, or I don't like these windows here, or I want this, or I want that. And all of a sudden, that very expensive set of plans that you just drew up and had engineered is all changing. I want to start with some real nice, pretty sketches, and the veteran move that I've learned over many years of building is I purpose to leave one elevation of my sketches just looking butt ugly. And I leave it looking butt ugly to draw the Architectural Design Board Review's attention to that particular area. The rest of it, they tend to go, well, this all looks much better than this, so they kind of approve this, and they focus their critique in just one area. Here's the psychology. This team is gathered to critique you. They're going to critique you. They're going to change something. I'm just going to focus their energies in one particular area. So then I say to them, oh gosh, you're so right. What was I thinking? You people are experts. This is just so wrong. I will incorporate every one of your suggestions and ideas in this area, and I'll be back next month at the next month's meeting to put it in front of you, and so that you can see that everything you've told me to do, I've now done. And what you do is you get out of there in 2 steps. Never argue with the Architectural Design Board Committee. I mean, if they want this kind of plant there, put it there. Ask what they want in advance. Try to give them that, but leave something obvious for them to critique and mold. That way you'll get through this committee in 2 steps versus I've seen people hung up in Architectural Design Board Committee for 2 years because they come in and keep arguing their point. The more you argue, the worse it gets. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you're going to go. So really design a nice looking building. Look at the ones in the area that have been approved. Try to focus your efforts to give them what they've already kind of said they like, but leave something obvious for them to pound on, which takes their focus off of everything else. Change then what they've suggested, and you've given them everything then they want. Once you've got the Architectural Design Board approval for the overall look of the building, then you take it to a working construction set of drawings. Then you have your architect pencil some working drawings and get the engineering on those drawings that you will then need to submit to the city or county to get your building permits for that site. Now, as we go through the construction process, you're going to see that there's a lot of choices that you're going to have to make. A lot of actual construction choices. And I really hope that by walking through a building from start to finish, the benefit of understanding what your choices are will help you to make better decisions along the way. Cost savings decisions, maintenance-related decisions, market-related decisions. There are all kinds of decisions that you're going to have to make. For the purpose of this one scenario, we are going to build this 6-plex. Our initial use of this sixplex is to keep this sixplex in our portfolio as a rental. But of course, we're going to be having an investment mind that says if we ever had to sell what we're building, we're going to make sure that what we're building has a market to be sold one at a time as condominiums or as separate townhouse entities. So we've got a market investment mind while we're building this thing. It's never build something that just has one utilitarian purpose unless it is for your own use and falls under the category of Oz. I've built office buildings for my own purpose, never intending to sell. That's Oz. I've built homes for my own purpose. Believe me, they would have no market because they're so specialized and so me that there isn't anybody else in the world that would want them. When I'm building, intending at some point in the future to sell what I'm building, which is 99% of everything you're going to do, you have to work backwards from a market, backwards from your function, backwards from an investment criteria around price per square foot of rental income. All of these factors come into the decisions you're going to make about where to spend your money and why on the construction side of the equation. Okay, well, here we are. We've gotten through all of that. We've released our feasibility. We've closed on our piece of dirt. We've gotten through any architectural design board committee. We've now have submitted and received all of our working, permitted set of plans to start going. We've got to bring a crew on now to clear off this site, and we've done that. We've hauled away the asbestos siding. It cost us $40,000, but we learned. We'll never do that again. We've bladed the rest of the house. We've pulled out the oil tank. That one hurt a little bit too. We didn't see that coming. Now we've got a site, and we're going to start preparing a foundation. There are a few things that I need you to know about foundations, and there's very different strategies that go into foundations. One, if you're planning on having this building a long time in your own portfolio, I want you to think on foundations from a different perspective. If you're going to build this thing and immediately after construction sell it, I want you to think about foundations in a different way. Now, each foundation is going to have to structurally be able to handle what we're doing on top of it. What are the differences? The main difference is that I'm going to build a foundation that has a crawl space under that foundation that is not just a minimum crawl space if I'm going to keep the building. In other words, if I'm going to build this building and sell it and my minimum crawl space is 2 feet, fine. I'm going to build it. It's going to have a 2-foot crawl space because that just means a shorter wall on my foundation, right? And I'm going to put a piece of black plastic down for my vapor barrier. I'm going to do the minimum required code because I'm going to sell this thing and down the road I go. If I'm going to build this thing and have to keep it for a period of time, the likelihood of me having to go in that crawl space over the next 20 years runs pretty high. And therefore, I'm going to be thinking owner's mentality much more than a retail sales product. I'm going to put a crawl space in that is at least 4 feet tall. Now, when I say crawl space, what I'm talking about is from the grade, the dirt grade, up to the bottom of my floor joist, that space in there. And what I can tell you is that if you ever have to go in a crawl space for any reason, the difference between 2 feet and 4 feet is the difference between light and dark. It is absolutely a pain in the ass to crawl into a crawl space with a 2-foot or less crawl space. Let me tell you a story. You'll appreciate this in new form if I tell you a story. I was hired to do a major remodel on a home, and part of that remodel entailed replumbing the entire house. A 2 stories above grade house, and then with a crawl space under the home. And I bid this job without really looking at the crawl space, knowing that there was a crawl space there, but I didn't really go down in the crawl space to look at it prior to bidding this job. And so in replumbing the home, of course, I've got to run all new water lines, all new drain lines, and the water line main comes through the crawl space of the home. And of course, the drain lines come all the way down into the crawl space and then exit underneath the foundation. So I not only had water line connections I had to make in the crawl space, I had sewer and drain line connections I had to make in the crawl space. So the way you replumb is you start high and you work your way down and you stub all of your new connections down into the crawl space, and then you go into the crawl space to hook up your connections, hook up your water line to the main water line coming into the building, hook up your sewer into the main sewer line coming in. I'm working with a gentleman on this site, and we determined that what he was going to do today was go leave the job site and go on a host of errands to gather materials for the next wave of the project, which he'd be running around all day gathering materials. This was on a Friday, by the way, and so if his gathering of materials took him all day, he may not be back to the job site until Monday. If he was able to gather all the materials and come back by the end of the day Friday, then tremendous. Of course, the people who own this home are gone and have left the site until the remodel is done, so nobody lives there. Okay, so his job is to leave and go gather materials. My job in that day was to go into the crawl space and make all of the final tie-in connections of the water line and the sewer lines. And so I go down and I pop open the hatch to the crawl space and I go, oh my gosh, this is a real narrow, short crawl space. Picture the joist structure of this home, 2x12s that are 2 foot on center. So there's 22.5 inches in between those joist bays. And then at one end of the home where I first popped my head in, from the bottom of the joist to the dirt was about 24 inches. But as I took my light and I shined it way back to the other side of the house where my plumbing stubs, I could see them, were stubbed down, it was hard to tell, but it looked like the dirt rose higher and higher and higher and was almost to the bottom. The dirt was nearly touching the joist space. And I thought to myself, gosh, this is going to be a real challenge to get there. And so I thought the best way to do it would be to lay on my back, put all of my plumbing fittings, my copper fittings, my solder, my flux, my torch on my chest, get in between one of these 2x12 joist bays, and actually with my feet kick myself while sliding on my back all the way back to where the plumbing stubs were. And this seemed to be an efficient way to get from point A to point B, because crawling on my belly with my equipment seemed awkward. I could just lay it on my chest and slide on my back all the way back there. So I got in position in the right joist bay, running like railroad tracks from where I was to all the way back to where I had to go. And I start kicking. And of course, there's a million spider webs and things falling in my face. And so I just kind of have my eyes closed and I'm just have my little headlamp on for light. And I'm kicking my way back there with my feet, pushing myself along. And I can feel the joist, the 2x12 joists first starting, up high, and I could feel the spider webs. But all of a sudden, I could feel those 2x12 joists kind of rubbing on the tops of my collarbones. And then all of a sudden, they were working their way down onto my shoulders. And all of a sudden, I'm kicking, and my nose gets scraped on the subfloor and some nails sticking through the subfloor, and my eyes were closed, and I went, oh my gosh, what is this? And I finally tried to take my hand and lift it up to my face to kind of clear the stuff away from my eyes and face, and I couldn't move my hand up by my face, because when I finally opened my eyes, my nose was touching the subfloor, and my shoulders are wedged between the 2x12s. My back is on the dirt. My chest is nearly touching the subfloor. And I'm laying there going, oh my gosh, there is no way in the world I'm going to be able to use my hands and plumb and do all of what I need to do here, this isn't going to work. I need to crawl back out of here and figure out a new plan. So I tried to reverse my direction by digging in my heels to pull my way now back out of this. Well, there's nice soft dirt in the crawl space, and as I start trying to pull dirt, all it's doing is it's pulling dirt up under the back of my knees. And the more I pulled, the tighter things got. And I just, all of a sudden, my knees now are touching the subfloor, and I've got dirt underneath my knees, and I am absolutely and completely stuck. I am wedged between these 2x12 joists. My back's on the dirt. My face is against the subfloor. I've got spiders crawling on my face, and I've got dirt under my knees, and I'm completely stuck. My first thought was to curse the builder who built a home with virtually no crawl space. Second was to curse myself for not checking this out prior to taking on this project, because now I had no way in my mind where I could think of how am I going to connect these water lines and sewer lines in here. You can't work. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to excavate the dirt of this whole crawl space just to work. Well, those two thoughts lingered for about 2 seconds, because the third thought was, oh my God, I'm stuck in this freaking crawl space, and Rob, my friend and partner on this project, may not be back here until Monday. And it's Friday at about 9 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, this isn't good. And I laid there all day long on my back with spiders crawling across my face, trying to calm myself, breathing as if having a baby, that whole calming Lamaze thing. It was going on right there. And I thought, I may be here till Monday. Well, I had given up hope of anybody coming back. Fortunately, at 6 o'clock, I heard the door open, and I heard footsteps. And I gave out the most blood-curdling scream you've ever heard in your life for help. And Rob came around, looked in the hatch, which of course it's dark out now, went and got a flashlight. And as he shined the flashlight back towards where I was screaming from, all he could see were 2 size 12 boots pointed at him. And I'm stuck. Somehow, some way, and I mean, it took several hours. We were just ready to call the fire department. He was able to crawl back on his stomach within about 15 feet of me with a rope. I was able to point my toes at him, and he was able to throw a rope around my toes, and I was able to wiggle the rope down kind of onto my feet. He cinched the rope up, went outside the house, and pulled me out of this crawl space. I have to tell you, I ran out into the middle of the street, hyperventilating. I don't like tight spaces like this. And I swore, everything I ever built would have maximum crawl spaces. Now, I know that I just took 10 minutes telling you a story about crawl spaces. If you're building something and selling it, there are minimum codes, 2 feet in most cities and counties, that has to be in the crawl space. You know what? If you're keeping this building and there's any chance at all that you are going to have to go down there in the future, spend a little bit of money on concrete, dig the hole a little deeper, create yourself a crawl space that's at least 4 feet so that a real person could go down in the crawl space, fix some plumbing, fix some wiring, do whatever needs to be done in the future without having to go through that kind of experience, okay? All crawl spaces aren't alike. Another thing I'd like you to consider, again, certainly in the Oz category you would do this, but you may choose to do it right here and there, is to put a couple can lights down in this crawl space. And the reason can lights are important versus any light that hangs down is that you don't have to worry about clipping that light bulb with your head and breaking the light bulb off when you're down there. Can lights sit up flush to the bottom of the joist there, and you don't ever need to worry about hitting your head on them. A couple well-situated can lights really then provide for a crawl space that you can go down and work in. I was previewing a house a couple months ago with some friends of mine, and on its surface, the house looked real nice. But as we got into this, it was built on a real steep hillside, this house. And the crawl space hatch was a 3x3 little hatch door in the master bedroom closet. So you had to go into the closet and then pull the hatch door. In other words, pull a section of the floor up that has carpet on it, set the hatch aside in the closet, and then this was the access to the crawl space in the house. Well, because this house was built on a steep hill, the low side of the hill was where the big part, of course, of this crawl space was. And I looked down there, and sure enough, there was a switch. And I turned on the switch, and there were lights down there. That was really nice. What was shocking to me is that there was actually a wood-framed ladder that allowed you to walk down into this crawl space, and the crawl space was maybe 12 to 14 feet tall on the downslope side of this foundation. So this house was built on a very steep slope with framing that went up about 14 feet on the low side before the floor joists ever started. Okay, that's fine. I understand that. But what was shocking was that in the crawl space was the furnace, and 2 hot water tanks were in the crawl space. The only way to replace a water tank in that house would be to somehow drain the water tank, which I'm not sure how you would do that. You'd have to drill a hole through the outside wall, run a hose outside to the downslope to drain the tank. But then the only way to get the tank out of there and a new one in is 12 feet above you, walking up a vertical ladder, taking the water tank through a 3x3 hatch door in the closet. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. Why would anybody put their water tanks and their furnace down in this crawl space if you ever had to service them, if you ever had to repair them? This is just ridiculous. So crawl spaces are not intended to frequent often. When you do, make them reasonable, but don't put things like furnaces and water tanks down underneath the house. I see it occasionally, and every time I see it, I think, how stupid. Figure out a floor plan that there's space to put those in the garage or a room off the garage or a separate utility room of some kind, okay? The story that always reminds me about why we should have lights in our crawl space, a friend of mine, his name is Gary. He is a great big guy, 6'6". I mean, he's a monster. He's probably 300 pounds. Great big chested Norwegian guy. He built a sprawling rambler, all on one level, sprawling farm-style rambler. And his crawl space hatch door was at one end of the sprawling house, and his master bedroom was at the entire other end of the house. And as they moved into the house, they're in their bedroom trying to sleep, and right underneath his bed, he hears this gnawing and chewing going on. Something definitely in his crawl space that's chewing things. And of course, he didn't want any animals in his crawl space. He thought he had it all vented, all sealed properly so that nothing could get in there. But this chewing went on, and finally he decided he had to go see what was going on and check it out. So he opens his crawl hatch door that literally is 45 yards away at the other end of this house. He's got a 2-foot crawl space in this house. He rails out 200 feet of extension cord, and he puts a drop light. You know those kind of lights with the basket around the light bulb? He has a drop light, ties to the extension cord, plugs it in, ties a knot so it doesn't become unplugged, plugs the extension cord in the laundry room, which is way at the end of the house, crawls into the crawl space and proceeds to crawl on his belly all the way from one end of the house to the other, underneath beams, underneath ducting. Some of it he could barely get under because it was, although it's 2 feet from the dirt to the bottom of his joists, still with hanging down ducting and beams, it's less than that in certain places. All to go investigate what this gnawing sound is underneath his master bedroom. He's crawling along with this work light in the little wire basket, and he finally gets all the way down to the end of the house where this gnawing occurs, and he shines the light in front of them. He can see the insulation laying on the vapor barrier down below, so he knows he's getting close. And he approaches this area, and he kind of rolls on his side to point the light up into the joist space where the insulation is sort of hanging to see what he can see. And as he puts the light up there to look, the last memory he has is of this gargantuan rat-looking creature that opens its mouth. He sees a pink nose and this big open jaw lunging towards his face with teeth. And of course he freaks out and moves his hand, and when he moves his hand, he smacks the joist with his work light, and of course breaks the light bulb in his work light. So now he's in a pitch dark crawl space with this last little snapshot of teeth going for his face. And he's got 45 yards to crawl on his belly to get out of there, which of course he does in record time, smacking, ducting, knocking his head on beams, Anyway, he gets himself out of there. It was a panic. My first thought when I heard this story, besides laughing my ass off, was to think in terms of a 4 or 5 foot crawl space with a nice rat slab with can lights underneath there. He could have just hunkered down and walked to this area of investigation. Okay, first of all, how does he solve this problem? Well, I have to tell you the end of the story. This is a, rural country boy, and he buys smoke bombs, and he throws the smoke bombs, and he waits by his hatch door, which is in his laundry room right at the end of the building, and with a .22 pistol, and sure enough, finally, these bombs smoked out what was a possum, which looks like the world's biggest rat. And the possum tries to run out the hatch door. And of course, there ends the story. Gary got him. But I think to myself, if ever you have to go down in a crawl space, the last thing you want to do is be banging around, hitting your head on things with your work light breaking at the fear of possums and rats. So, okay. When we start talking about putting this whole foundation package together, we're going to talk about the actual surface of the dirt in the crawl space. We can leave it as dirt. Code will allow us to leave it as dirt and put a vapor barrier on it. But crawling around on a piece of black plastic isn't nearly as good as actually insulating that dirt and pouring concrete on top of your crawl space, commonly known as a rat slab, and finishing concrete in that crawl space. Yes, you're going to spend more money. But what you're doing is, one, creating a nice, clean crawl space. It isn't going to have a bunch of rodents running around down there. You're going to be able to insulate underneath your concrete, therefore creating a situation in cold weather areas where you're not going to have broken pipes and freezing conditions in your crawl space. Anything that I have ever built intending to keep for a long period of time, I have poured a rat slab in the crawl space so that I don't have all this funky plastic laying around. I've got a nice finished slab in the crawl space. Now, this doesn't need to be finished with a trowel into perfection. It just needs to be raked out fairly smooth, a rough finish on it, just so that when you're crawling around down there, you're in a nice, dry piece of concrete floor versus a bunch of dirt and plastic, okay?